Christopher Columbus, the only man in history to accidentally kick off genocide, start the slave trade, confuse Cuba for China, and still get a long weekend named after him. This guy didn't discover America. He discovered how far white privilege can float. He showed up uninvited, ruined everything, and even bragged about it. He was history's most violent tourist with the worst sense of direction, and somehow we let him rebrand as a hero. Guys, this is not a voyage of discovery. This is everything wrong with the dumbest legend in colonial history, Christopher Columbus. Sorry to interrupt, but Columbus discovered America faster than you found the subscribe button. Please fix that. Thanks. Who even was this guy? First up, let's talk about the most overhyped sailor in history. Christopher Columbus, born around 1451 in Genoa, Italy, is remembered as the guy who discovered America. Which is pretty wild, considering he never actually stepped foot on the place we now call the United States. Funded by the Spanish crown in 1492, Columbus set sail to find a shortcut to Asia and ended up crash landing in the Bahamas. But don't worry, he insisted it was Asia anyway. What most people don't know is that Columbus was later arrested for mismanaging the colonies like a sociopath, believed manatees were mermaids, and died broke and delusional. And yet somehow we put him on postage stamps, named cities after him, and gave him a whole day off work. Columbus was less of a visionary and more of a historically glorified GPS malfunction. He's not the hero history made him out to be. He's just the guy who got lucky that a whole continent happened to be in his way. I discovered this. You can't discover a place that already has millions of people living in it, right? But that didn't stop our guy Columbus from barging into the Caribbean in 1492, planting a flag, and claiming everything like it was a yard sale. He rolls up on thriving Taino communities, looks around and says, "Nice place, mine now." Even worse, he wasn't even the first European to get there. Viking explorer Leif Erikson showed up centuries earlier and managed to not commit mass atrocities while doing it. Columbus just had better PR. And let's be clear, he didn't land in North America. He hit a few Caribbean islands, misread every sign, and declared it a whole new world. The fact that people still say he discovered America is less a testament to his greatness and more a historical case of branding gone wrong. He wasn't a trailblazer. He was a colonizer who mistook someone else's home for a blank map. Not a flat Earth hero. Columbus didn't prove the Earth was round. He just didn't die from being wrong. The myth that people thought he'd sail off the edge of the planet? Nah, that's just total BS. Most educated Europeans in 1492 already knew the Earth was a sphere. The real problem wasn't flat Earth skeptics, it was that Columbus kinda sucked at math. He claimed Asia was only 2,400 miles west of Europe. Reality check, it's over 10,000 miles. He wasn't brave, he was wildly lucky. If the Americas hadn't been chilling in the middle of his dumb mistake, he and his crew would have been skeletons on a very empty ocean. But because they hit land first, people started calling him a genius instead of a sailing miscalculation. Let's not confuse bravery with ignorance. This wasn't some brilliant feat of science. It was a dude ignoring experts and surviving just long enough to plant a flag somewhere. Liar, liar, coconut fire. After realizing he was nowhere near Asia, did Columbus admit he messed up? Of course not. He literally forced his crew to sign a document swearing they'd reached Asia, even though they were clearly in the Caribbean. It's the 15th century version of making your friends lie to your boss so you don't get fired. Columbus knew the Spanish crown expected gold, silk, and proof of a new trade route. Instead, he brought back a bunch of confused islanders, some parrots, and a massive ego. So rather than admit he'd found something new, he doubled down on the fantasy, like a bad magician insisting the rabbit's still in the hat. This wasn't exploration, it was historical gaslighting with ocean views. The only thing Columbus discovered was how far a man will go to protect his reputation by lying through his wooden teeth. The gold that wasn't there. Columbus arrived in the New World expecting El Dorado and left with a pile of broken dreams and kidnapped locals. He promised Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand unimaginable wealth from golden cities, rivers of jewels, and a fast pass to Asian spices. What they got? Well, let me tell ya, mud huts, angry indigenous people, and Columbus awkwardly clearing his throat and going, "Well, I've got some slaves instead." When the gold didn't magically appear, Columbus turned to human trafficking like it was Plan B on a treasure map. This guy didn't just break promises. He snapped them in half and fed them to the dogs. Imagine if Amazon said your package of gold would arrive in 2 days and instead shipped you trauma and colonization. That's the Columbus delivery guarantee. Human trafficking pioneer. Let's give Columbus credit where it's due. He was the first European to say, "Hey, let's build an international slave pipeline across the Atlantic." In 1495, he rounded up 1,500 Taino people, men, women, and children, and shipped 500 of them to Spain in chains. And of course, about 200 died en route. Bummer. Anyway, the survivors were paraded through the streets like trophies and sold into slavery. And that wasn't a one-time thing. Columbus kept the human exports coming, turning the New World into a living catalog of free labor. He literally kickstarted what would become one of the most horrific enterprises in human history. And somehow, this guy still has cities, holidays, and elementary school murals dedicated to him. Imagine if Amazon launched its business by kidnapping people and selling them. Oh wait, Columbus did it first. Visionary? Well, no. Monster with a boat? Absolutely. Welcome to the death mines. If you thought Columbus just kidnapped people and called it a day, oh no, you dear boys, girls, and non-binary party peoples, he was an overachiever in cruelty. Men, women, and children were marched into rivers and mountains to sift for flecks of gold under blistering sun and armed Spanish oversight. Can't find any? No worries, just face torture, mutilation, or death. These weren't just labor camps. They were slow-motion execution chambers disguised as economic enterprise. And for what? A few shiny trinkets to impress the crown and fund more voyages of doom. Columbus treated an entire population like a disposable workforce before the ink on his sailing orders had even dried. He didn't bring civilization to the New World. He brought sweatshops with swords. The Manatee Incident. So, was he all that bad? Well, get ready for some comedy relief. Because even history's biggest villain had his dumb moments. One day while exploring near the Dominican Republic, Columbus saw manatees and thought they were mermaids. Not only did he mistake 1,200-pound sea cows for mystical ocean babes, he also wrote, and I quote, that they were not half as beautiful as they are painted. Thanks for the review, Chris. It's like seeing a walrus and being disappointed it's not Ariana Grande. You know you're delusional when you commit mass genocide and still find time to criticize imaginary fish women. This wasn't just a funny error. It showed how Columbus was out here mislabeling everything and calling it exploration. It wasn't India, they weren't Indians, and those sure as hell weren't mermaids. The man couldn't tell up from down and yet got 4 government-funded voyages. Meanwhile, the manatee is just swimming around, trying to mind its business. Gold or die, literally. Okay, back to the horror. Here's a management strategy you don't learn in business school. Demand gold from people who live on an island with almost none, and then chop off their hands when they fail. Columbus issued a tribute system requiring every Taino over 14 years old to deliver a hawk's bell of gold dust every 3 months. In return, they got a little token to wear around their neck that said, "Congratulations, you get to keep your limbs." Survivors were left to bleed out as warnings to others. It was medieval horror dressed up as colonial bookkeeping. And if you're wondering how well this system worked, well, it didn't. The gold wasn't there, it never was. But that didn't stop Columbus from enforcing this madness with brutal efficiency. This wasn't governance, it was terror disguised as taxation. And we still have statues of this guy standing proudly in city squares like he was a misunderstood entrepreneur. Nope. He was a hand-chopping extortionist with royal funding. Dogs of war. Forget swords, forget guns. Columbus brought the real nightmare fuel, the war dogs. Giant mastiffs fitted with armor, trained specifically to rip indigenous people apart on command. And no, this isn't some cartoon villain exaggeration. This was an actual part of his conquest playbook. These dogs weren't just for protection. They were weapons of psychological warfare. When natives resisted, Columbus sent in the dogs to tear through villages, mauling anyone who dared to run. Survivors were left traumatized, torn apart, or dead. This wasn't war. It was carnage. Even the Spanish chroniclers wrote about the horror with something that almost resembled guilt. And yet, Columbus stood by it all like it was just another Tuesday in paradise. It's like showing up at someone's house, stealing everything, and then unleashing pit bulls to chase them off their own porch. If your leadership strategy includes release the attack hounds, you're not a hero. You're a historical war criminal with a canine kill squad. Death as a deterrent. So what did Columbus do when the natives got tired of being enslaved, tortured, and hunted by dogs? He escalated. When revolts broke out, and they did, Columbus responded with pure nightmare fuel. Send a message. Eyewitness accounts describe heads on pikes, limbs nailed to posts, and entire villages massacred for daring to fight back. And it wasn't limited to the Taino. Columbus also punished his own men if they questioned his rule. So yeah, if you thought the guy was just a misguided sailor, think again. He was also a full-time sadistic overlord with a flair for gruesome public relations. And yet, every October, schools still hand out coloring sheets with his name on them. Ha, cool. The numbers don't lie. If there were a leaderboard for wiping out entire civilizations, Columbus would be wearing the gold medal and smiling in his portrait. When he first arrived in Hispaniola, the Taino population was around 250,000. 50 years later, just 14,000 remained. That's a 94% drop. And no, it wasn't just disease. Columbus's policies of slavery, forced labor, mutilation, and mass murder absolutely played their part. This wasn't some accidental cultural clash. It was systemic annihilation. Columbus's legacy isn't maps and trade routes, it's mass graves, cultural erasure, and generational trauma. He didn't just stumble into a new world. He turned it into a test lab for conquest. Climate Change Explorer Edition. Did Christopher Columbus accidentally cause global cooling? Oh yes, let's add climate influencer to his already cursed resume. When European contact led to the deaths of up to 56 million indigenous people, vast stretches of farmland across the Americas were abandoned. What happened next? Forest regrew. So many trees came back that they pulled enough CO2 out of the atmosphere to slightly cool the entire planet. Some researchers link this to the Little Ice Age, a centuries-long cold snap that affected crops, weather patterns, and societies across Europe. So yeah, Columbus may have unintentionally changed the literal climate through genocide. Imagine being such a destructive force that you leave a carbon footprint shaped like a mass grave. Most people reduce their emissions by turning off the lights. Columbus did it by wiping out civilizations. Disease delivery service. When Chris and his crew arrived in the Caribbean, they didn't just bring swords and entitlement. They brought a walking biological disaster. Smallpox, measles, influenza, you name it. Diseases that Europeans had centuries of exposure to hit the indigenous populations like a nuclear bomb. These weren't just outbreaks. They were civilization-ending plagues. Entire villages were wiped out in just weeks. People who had lived on those islands for thousands of years died faster than Columbus could rename them. And no, he didn't know about germ theory, but ignorance didn't make the results any less apocalyptic. His voyage launched a biological catastrophe that killed millions. And somehow we act like that was just an unfortunate side effect of exploration. That's like saying Chernobyl was a quirky power outage. When pirates punish pirates, you'd think the Spanish settlers would be his ride or die crew, right? Nope. Even they couldn't stand Columbus after a while. Why? because he punished his own men like they were on a medieval reality show called Who Wants to Be Publicly Whipped? Under his rule, soldiers were executed for petty offenses, mutinies broke out like acne, and morale tanked faster than a leaky canoe. He was running a colony like it was a prison camp, and not even a well-managed one. Eventually, the settlers were like, okay, we'd rather die in the jungle than listen to this lunatic one more day. It's the first time in history colonizers colonized other colonizers just to escape a bad boss. Columbus didn't unite the Spanish outposts. He divided them through micromanagement and masochism. He wasn't just bad at diplomacy, he was bad at being a basic human being. Mouth shut, literally. You'd think the violence would stop at the indigenous people. Nope. Columbus turned on his own citizens too. Case in point, a Spanish woman dared to speak ill of him and his brothers. So naturally, he ordered her tongue cut out. Yup, Columbus took the whole watch your mouth thing way too literally. This wasn't some hearsay or rumor. It was one of the documented charges against him when the Spanish crown investigated his rule. And this wasn't an isolated incident. Columbus ruled with such cruelty that even women of his own culture weren't safe from his ego-driven wrath. The guy was out here handing out mutilation like party favors, all to protect his fragile pride. This wasn't governance. It was a dictatorship sponsored by narcissism. Arrested and deported by his own bosses. When even the monarchy that paid you to colonize says, okay dude, you've officially gone too far, you know you've messed up. After years of complaints from both indigenous people and Spanish settlers, the crown finally said, enough, and arrested Columbus. He was sent back to Spain in chains. Yes, literal chains. Picture the man who once claimed entire continents limping aboard a ship as a disgraced criminal, probably still yelling about how Cuba is actually Japan. His official charges? Mismanagement, brutality, and abuse of power. You know, just a regular Tuesday in Columbus land. He was stripped of his governorship and never given command again, which is basically 15th century HR firing you with extreme prejudice. Yet somehow, people still romanticize him as a brave explorer. The man was a menace, and even his employers agreed. Demoted like a dictator. When the Spanish monarchy sends you across the ocean to build a colony and you respond with mass executions, mutilations, and total chaos, guess what? You get fired. After years of complaints from indigenous people, settlers, and even his own crew, Columbus was stripped of his governorship in 1500 and shipped back to Spain in shackles. He lost his titles, his authority, and whatever shred of credibility he still had. Imagine being so bad at colonizing that the literal inventors of the Inquisition were like, okay bro, that's too much. And what did Columbus do afterward? Whine. A lot. He spent the rest of his life begging for his titles back and complaining that he hadn't been rewarded properly for his service. It's one of the rare times in colonial history where karma actually packed a punch. Beheaded and dumped. In recent years, the public opinion on Columbus has shifted from national hero to problematic nightmare, and his statues have paid the price. Cities across the US and beyond have seen his likeness get spray painted, defaced, beheaded, and straight up thrown into lakes. It's like a purge, but with bronze and irony. These aren't just acts of vandalism, they're reactions to centuries of ignoring who Columbus actually was. For a lot of people, those statues don't represent courage or exploration. They represent genocide, slavery, and whitewashed lies. Protesters have dragged his image through the mud, literally. And communities have started replacing his monuments with ones honoring indigenous leaders or historical truth. And honestly, good. If your statue needs 24/7 police protection and a PR team, maybe it shouldn't be in a public park. Columbus spent his life renaming people, places, and ideas. So it's kind of poetic that his own legacy is finally getting a name change too. Let the record show, statues don't make you a hero. Your actions do. And his actions sucked big time. A holiday with issues. Columbus Day used to be the ultimate Yay America holiday. Parades, school plays, awkwardly off-key renditions of patriotic songs. But in recent years, cities and states across the US have started saying, maybe we shouldn't celebrate the guy who jump-started genocide. Enter Indigenous Peoples Day, a growing movement to replace Columbus Day with a day that honors the people he tried to erase. It's not just a name swap, it's a full-on reality check. Because celebrating Columbus is like throwing a surprise party for your burglar. The backlash has been strong and deserved. Statues have come down, school curriculums are changing, and the people defending Columbus Day? Mostly the same crowd who get angry when their favorite sports team changes logos. Sorry, but if your holiday hero committed mass atrocities and never actually set foot in the US, maybe it's time for a rebrand. Columbus had his centuries. Now it's time we celebrate the people who were already here. America's most absentee icon. Columbus never actually set foot in what we now call the United States. Not once. He landed in the Bahamas, explored parts of Cuba and Hispaniola, and touched a few other Caribbean islands. That's it. Columbus is the patron saint of accidental fame, honored more for the myth than the man. If historical irony could roll its eyes, this would be the moment. We built an entire identity around a dude who didn't even show up to the party. Abandon a hip and everyone on it. Let's add worst boss in maritime history to Columbus's resume. On his first voyage in 1492, after wrecking the Santa Maria off the coast of Hispaniola, Columbus decided to leave around 39 men behind to start a colony while he returned to Spain. Sounds bold, right? Except for the part where he left them with no government, no food infrastructure, no supplies, and zero clue what they were doing. By the time Columbus returned on his second voyage, every single one of those men was dead. According to Columbus, the Taino killed them in retaliation for their violent behavior. According to other sources, the Spaniards had been looting, raping, and causing chaos until the locals had enough. So not only did he abandon his men, he also likely set them up to die through sheer mismanagement and arrogance. The death of a salesman. Christopher Columbus died in 1506, broke, bitter, and still completely wrong about where he'd been. The man genuinely believed he had found a shortcut to Asia, despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary. He had no idea that he'd stumbled upon two entirely separate continents, or that his voyages would unleash centuries of conquest, slavery, and disease. Instead, he died writing angry letters to the king and queen, whining about how nobody respected him anymore. For someone who changed the course of history, Columbus died with all the fanfare of a failed Kickstarter campaign. And there you have it. The tale of a lost, delusional map wrecker who somehow turned slavery, lies, and geographic failure into statues and street names. What do you think of Christopher Columbus? Let me know down below. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.